to the Momnificent Podcast. This is the place where we help parents live a happy, healthy life with their kids. We're going to show you how to connect with your child and help them even in their most difficult moments as we hear from experts in the field. I'm your host, Dr. Karin Jakubowski, an international speaker, public school principal, and former struggling student. The Momnificent Podcast equips parents with science-based strategies to help you live a happy, healthy life with your kids. Welcome. Dr. Hal Urban is the author of 8 books, all with an emphasis on good character. His first book, Life's Greatest Lessons, was selected by Writer's Digest as the Inspirational Book of the Year. Since 1992, Dr. Urban has traveled to more than 2 million miles while speaking nationally and internationally on positive character traits and the relationship to the quality of life. He has made more than 1,000 presentations in 43 states, Washington, D.C., and 8 foreign countries. Hal has a genuine love of life that includes several passions. Chief among them are his 3 F's: family, faith, and friends. His other main interests and activities are reading, sports, travel, photography, and lifelong learning. You'll even find him as early as 5 a.m. in the gym daily, staying active and fit. Hal, welcome to Momnificent.
Good to be with you, Karen.
So Hal, I love how you, when you were a teacher, you would give a question to the parents of your students to rate their child, whether they had low, medium, or high motivation. What if a parent rated their child as low motivation, or maybe a listener deals with that with their own child? What would you say to them?
Well, that was just one of many questions that I asked the parents at the beginning of the year. And the main reason I asked it is because I wanted the student and the parents to talk about it, about motivation level, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what motivation is. In my very first book, I have a chapter that says real motivation comes from within. It doesn't come from a motivational speaker. It doesn't come from somebody going rah, 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 and all that type of thing. That type of motivation will last for maybe a coach might get his team all fired up and it might last for that game. But real motivation is something that you feel inside. But basically, I just wanted them to talk to each other and to see how the parents perceive the motivation of the student as opposed to how the student saw his or her own motivation. But those were usually the same. Whatever the parents were observing in the student pretty much agreed that's my motivation level. But I had parents over the years say that I really motivated their kid, and I would say no, I really didn't. I said I may have made the subject more interesting or made your student realize he or she could succeed. But anyway, people have different concepts of what motivation is. Yeah.
And I'm sure you inspired them.
Well, that is a different, and I hope I did inspire them. If you in teaching, if you treat students like they're important, I was taught early on, if you can reach them, you can teach them. If you can connect with them, if they know you care about them, and you're not boring, they'll let you teach them.
Yeah.
Those
don't be boring. That's the key.
Yeah.
They're not gonna pay attention along with that. So Hal, maybe talk our listeners through how your 12 great and best lessons in life came to be, that book that you wrote.
Originally it was called 20 Things I Want My Kids to Know. And I had been teaching for about 25 years. And I had always read myself what I call personal growth books. I know the book industry calls them self-help. I don't like that term. It's an oxymoron. Anyway. But I read books that were about personal development, and I always thought that we should be teaching some of those things in school. I thought we did a good job teaching academic subjects, but we didn't teach them about life itself. And so I wrote this book, and it got published. And this is before the days of email, about 30 years ago. And I started getting letters, especially from business people. One of them was an executive at Microsoft when Microsoft was a pretty new company, and the letters basically said they loved the book. They were buying it for new employees, but it wasn't just for kids. It was for everybody. So after it really picked up in sales, then Simon and Schuster, my publisher, asked me about taking kids off the title, changing the title. And the subtitle of the book originally was Passing On Life's Greatest Lessons. And so we just changed the title to Life's Greatest Lessons and 20 Things That Matter. But it's dedicated to my three sons. Those are things I wanted them to know about life. And then it could be accessible to other people. And I'm still, to this day, 30 years later, I'm still surprised at the success of the book. It was my first venture, and it sold about 500,000 now, and I still get royalty checks from the publisher, so I know it's still selling.
Oh, so I love, any parent would love to hear, like, okay, so what are those top lessons that I could be working with my child on and learning? And so in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, maybe that's a great book study I can do with my parents and teachers, because we did that with Michelle Borba's book, Thrivers, and it was such a success, and parents loved it. And the teachers were like, can you run this book club again? I was like, this is so exciting. So I'll have to add that one to my docket. So you used to teach your students the 3 ways of communicating. Can you share with us what those are? Because I think parents might love hearing this, and maybe it's something they can help teach their kids.
Now, there's different ways to answer that question. The 3 ways of communicating, I'm thinking of verbal and nonverbal, but there's like the 3 types of words that you use. Is that what you mean by the question?
It was in your book that you had for the teachers, and you probably spun it more for teachers, but I thought it could be a takeaway for the parents.
Okay, well, one of the things I emphasize with my students about communication is the 3 levels of communication, or when you're talking to each other, 3 types of words. One type of word is neutral, it's just information. It's neither positive nor negative. But the other 2 types we could describe as positive and negative, but I use the words toxic and nourishing. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Tell me about that, because
in my book that I wrote for teachers, one chapter says good teachers prevent. Let's see, I can't remember the exact title of the chapter, but it has to do with.
Here you go. I think I have it. Good teachers protect the atmosphere from toxic words.
Yeah, that's okay. That's right. Protect the atmosphere from toxic words. And we talked a lot at the beginning of the year about the impact that words have. And so I let them decide what kinds of words we would not use. Those were the toxic words. And so they would give them to me. And so we talked about things like put downs was always number 1, because teenagers have a tendency to put each other down a lot. So put downs was number 1. And then they said mean things to say, which is also a put down. Swearing, gossip, complaining, whining, those kinds of things. So we made a big list of them, and we posted them in the room, and everybody agreed we won't use those when we're in your classroom. And I said, if you slip once in a while, just say sorry, and we'll say apology accepted and move on, not make a big deal of it, And then we had another list, and those were nourishing words. Good teachers use and teach about nourishing words. And I use nourishing because nourishing means to stimulate growth. So those are things like, friendly greetings, sharing good news, compliments, thanking, and those types of things. So we always had a really good atmosphere in class because kids became aware of their words. So many people are not aware of how powerful their words can be, and even how long lasting what they say can be, for good or for bad, on somebody else. I think Mother Teresa said, kind words are short and easy to speak, but their echoes are truly endless. And there's been all kinds of research on the power of words. And I wrote my second book was called Positive Words, Powerful Results.
And you were known as the good news guy. How did you get that title?
Well, Yeah, that came from my students. When I was a social studies teacher, I taught government, I taught history, I taught current world affairs, world studies. And I always thought that current events should be wrapped, should be part of the curriculum. And for instance, if I'm teaching American government, it'd be foolish to try to teach it without showing how the government is operating at different levels: federal, local, state, national, so on. And so I gave them a simple little homework assignment. They were to find 5 major news items, give me the headline, and summarize it in 2 sentences. So it didn't take them very long, but they became really well informed. But one day, a kid said in class and said, "Yeah, Dr. Urban, for being such a positive guy, you sure give a negative homework assignment." And I said, "Whoa!" I said, "Me negative?" And we started talking about it. And they said, "Well, all the news is bad news." Now they were doing all this with newspapers, but it doesn't make any difference. It's still today, it's all bad news. And I said, "Well, I don't want to start class," because that was what we did at the beginning of every class. I said, "I don't want to start every class doing something negative." I said, let me think about this and I'll figure something out. And I thought I had a good idea, but it backfired on me. I said, "Turn the sheet over and write down 2 things you found in the newspaper that are good news, and I'll give you 2 points extra credit." And that became really frustrating for them because they said they spent more time looking for good news and couldn't find it. And then it bombed on me. And so I just kind of out of frustration one day, I said, "Okay, let's just share our own good news then. So when class started, I'd say who has good news. And if there was good news individually or in the family or at school or in the community, or even, sometimes the good news was we live in San Francisco Giants territory, and the good news was like last night, they won in extra innings. And so that would be, the Giants won tonight, or the 49ers or any of our local teams. And the kids they really got into it, and I still remember the first time we ever did it, a girl shared something really personal. And I think it was fantastic because it brought the whole class together. She said that her mother and father had been separated for 2 years and they had just gotten back together. And she was sharing how happy the family was, and I think there were a few tears in the classroom that day, but it made everybody realize you can share personal things, because when you're sharing good news, people like to hear it. It nourishes the atmosphere. And so that's what I did for the rest of my career. I had a big sign up. It says, "Who has good news?" But, they had at the beginning of class, they had 3 other options besides sharing good news. They could share good news. They could say something or someone they were thankful for. And obviously that's always positive. They could say something that they admired or appreciated about one of the other students in the class, or they could make us laugh. And they could make us laugh in one of 3 ways. They could tell a joke, tell a story, or just do something goofy that would make us laugh. As long as there was nothing dirty in it, it was okay. And we had some really good laughs in class. And that's a good way to start every class. I had to limit it to 5 minutes, because if I didn't, it would go on too long and we'd never get to the lesson,
I bet they were so excited to share over time. I'm sure more and more of them would pop up. But that's a great idea for parents to do when their kids get in the car from Carline, or when they get home from school, or maybe the parents working a long day and they finally see their child after the aftercare. Those are some great questions and activities that could just spur some great conversation to elicit that from your kid for the day. And even the one with the toxic words, they could use that at their own home and have the siblings sit down and come up with, like, okay, what words, how do we want to really talk? What don't we want to talk? I mean, when I was growing up, my sister and I argued and fought all the time. And my mom would make us read something that said, like, we would be kind, we would be nice. I remember standing there and read, she would force us to read it, but eventually, she's drilling into our heads, like, this is the way we're going to treat each other. So here's a little twist. If a parent called saying their child didn't want to go to school, and maybe it had to do with something going on in the classroom, with how the child felt about the teacher, What guidance would you give that parent?
That's one of the reasons I looked at your questions, and that's the most difficult one to answer because it's such an individual thing. What applies to one family or one student there's not a general answer, it's an individual thing. You really have to sit down first with the child, the student, and get more information as to what the problem is. If there was some real conflict with the teacher, then if I was the parent, then I would, not in an accusatory way, but in an informational way, get in touch with the teacher and just try to find out from the teacher's perspective what it is that's going on, and explain to him or her what the kid is going through. And do you think there's any way that the two of you could talk and solve it? Because sometimes there really is such a thing as a personality conflict. Maybe the teacher said something one day that the student misinterpreted and was offended by it. You just never know, about all of those situations. But I've always been a firm believer in talking things out and just finding out what each person is feeling and what they're perceiving, because sometimes what we perceive is not necessarily, the truth.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't notice what someone else is perceiving, the very thing you're doing, that another person sitting right next to them is perceiving it a completely different way. And so I love how you say, like, maybe just hear from the child and also hear from the parent so you can help understand where they're coming from to then sort of problem solve a solution to help both parties. Maybe you can help me with this one. If a parent has a child who uses the phrase, or I've even heard it in class, do we have to? What word of advice can you give listeners as a response?
That reminds me of something that I did with my students all the time, because I've often taught them, if you look for the good in the world and in your life that's all around you, it's like somebody saying, I have to go shopping, I have to go to the grocery store. But if you've been to places where you see people that don't have grocery stores and they go out and hunt for their food and all that kind of stuff, you ought to say, I get to go shopping, because you have the money and they have the food and you can just go. I just came home from a grocery store, and so that's what I always tell them. The have to go to school, even on Monday, I have to go to school. There are a lot of kids in the world that don't have a school to go to, and they're really hurting because they don't have to go to school. And you ought to say, I'm lucky to have a school that I get to go to. But it reminded me of something I did with my students too, that I taught them not to poison the atmosphere of the classroom, as I mentioned. And I was what you call a handout teacher. I didn't use textbooks very much. I thought I could produce better materials of my own. And I did use a lot of paper, but I duplicated them and handed them out and numbered the pages and everything. And kids are conditioned by handouts, especially I taught teenagers, and kids know if you hand them a paper, they know it's going to be work, something they have to work, they have to read, they might even have to write, they might even have to think, and so on. And so I said to them, look, these handouts I give you are better than the textbook. And I said, I worked really hard on them, and I don't want you to poison the atmosphere when I give them out. I start to give one to somebody and somebody goes, oh no. And you haven't even seen the paper yet. I said, look, this is what I want you to do. Whoever gets the first paper, you take it and you go, oh boy, this looks like it'll be a wonderful learning opportunity, and they laugh when the first person says that. And I said, okay, that's what I mean. That's what I want every time I hand out papers. And the kids got to the point where they wanted to be the first one to get the paper so they could say that or put a spin on it. We had a kid one time, he was so clever and so funny, and he always wanted to be the first one. And I said, well, I have to let somebody else be the first one too. And so one day he said, can I be number one? And I said, yeah, okay. So I gave it to him, and he didn't say anything. He just took the paper, and he looked like he was really studying it for a long time. And everybody was wondering, why isn't Jason going crazy? And then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know how you do it, Dr. Urban. I said, what do you mean? He says, they just keep getting better every day. And so it helps to have kids with a good sense of humor. The kids that I really enjoyed teaching were the drama kids, the kids that were in drama because they like play acting and all of that. And so I just wanted to always turn something negative into something positive. You don't have to do a lot of things, you get to do them.
So maybe when the child starts their homework, the parent can say to them, as soon as we start, we're going to say, this is going to be so exciting. But you know what? It's funny. I actually read research because I got that idea from someone at some point down the road. Like when I have a challenging conversation to have with a parent, or when something's really tough, or I have like a faculty meeting or something big that like is weighing on me. They literally said, if you stop and just say out loud, I am so excited about this, even though you're like completely terrified, in your brain, something will shift to give you energy and like the frame of mind to actually like get through it. And sometimes it's not as bad as we pre-think it would be. So that was, yeah, I love that idea.
No, that's, it's amazing what some positive words at the beginning of a class or the beginning of a conversation between two people can do. Michelle Gielan wrote a book called Broadcasting Happiness. And one of the things that she mentions in the book is that she says, start every conversation with something positive. And she endorsed my new book called The Power of Good News, but I sent her a copy and I said, please read this one section, because if she says begin the conversation positively, I say you begin the positivity in the greeting, because this is what happens when two people greet each other. First person comes up, let's say it's A and B, and A comes up to B and says, hi, how are you? And B says, fine. How are you? Fine. And then they walk away. What's it? Fine. Say something clever or something funny. This is what I say when people say, hey, Hal, good to see you. How are you? And I say, well, I was fine, but I'm much better now that I've seen you. And these are people I like. So it's really true. Every time I see somebody I like, that's good news to me. And what's really funny is that men and women respond different to that. If a woman says, hi, Hal, how are you? And I says, oh, I'm fine, but I'm better now that I've seen you. And they'll say, oh, you're so sweet, and that kind of stuff, or they'll laugh. But a man will say, oh, you're so full of it, if I say that same thing. But I've been in the habit of saying that all the time. And most people, if it catches them off guard, they laugh.
I like that. All right, here's a question from one of my parents that I received. Here's what they wrote. I want my kids to work hard and succeed. I have high expectations for them, and I don't want them to be lazy. I want them to know my expectations, but either I end up very strict or I reduce my expectations. How do I have a healthy balance? Is too much structure wrong?
Yeah, it is. And I think sometimes, there's so many stories about parents who were highly motivated and want their kids to get on a certain track and all that kind of stuff, even maybe follow them into the same profession. I think that's a mistake. I think you have to let kids develop and find out how they're wired and what it is that they want to do, and just have discussions about it. Not, you will do your homework at a certain time every day and that type of thing. But yeah, I think I forget what the name is of the parents who kind of just structure their kids' lives by every minute that they're doing something and I think they need more freedom. I was just reading something the other day, especially with younger kids, and it was an educator psychologist, and said play is more important than homework. There are some teachers that think giving a lot of homework every night makes them a good teacher, and it doesn't at all. I limited I mentioned the current events thing, that once they learned how to do that, it took about 10 minutes. And I didn't want them to spend any more time in that, because they have a social life besides their school all day. And teenagers, a lot of them work, but I don't think parents should pressure kids in terms of my expectations of your academic performance and so on. My 3 kids knew that I had a bachelor's, master's, doctorate, and all that. I didn't lay that on them that I expected them. I hope they graduate from college and go into something that they wanted to go into. But my main concern was how they treat other people. Yeah. And so I think kids have to find their own way.
And that's a skill that they're going to need for the rest of their life. And when you ask employers these days, they say, you know, what's the number one skill you're looking for in people? Well, can they get along with others? Can they be flexible? Can they be like all those soft skills, kind, considerate? Yeah, you can train anybody to do anything you need them to do, but behavior, that's the hardest thing to change. And if we can instill that in our kids now, that's what they need when they're socializing and playing and arguing and learning how to get along and interact. So sometimes as a parent, it can feel daunting to go into school and meet with the teacher and talk with the teacher. What can parents do to form a good partnership with their child's teacher?
You know, that should be the teacher's responsibility at the beginning. One of the things that I did the first part of school is that I sent a letter home and kind of gave them a little history of me personally, how long I taught, what I taught, my background. And I said, you are the first and most important teacher that Jimmy will ever have. And I'm here to form, literally, I said, form a partnership with you. I think that's one of the early chapters in my book. Teachers form a partnership with parents. And that's, and then that way things can get reinforced. But I think the teacher has to reach out, because I remember a lot of parents said no teacher had ever contacted me at the beginning of the year, inviting me to a partnership with you. And I even invited them. I said, come and observe the class anytime you want. Of course, their kid wouldn't like their parent in the back of the class, so we didn't get too many of those. But again, that's I think that's important that parents and teachers form a partnership.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable. And I love how it's the connection before you end up having to correct. You make that positive phone call home before you have to call about any other situation that's coming up that might be a little difficult to talk about. So Hal, what's one thing you would love our listeners to leave with today?
Well, are you asking me about about education or parenting or?
Let's go for the parents today, because then I'm going to invite you back to talk about my teacher.
Well, actually, this is an answer that would apply to parents and teachers both. If somebody asked me, what is the primary responsibility of a teacher? What is the primary responsibility of a parent? Is to bring out the best in your kid, to bring out the best in your student. And the goodness is there. I had to learn this from other people, because some kids come to school with a really bad attitude and you don't know why. You don't know what's going on in the background. But Zig Ziglar, who was a motivational speaker who died about 5 or 6 years ago, he had a lot of wisdom, and he said, be a good finder. He said, we find what we look for. He says, look for the good. And then I had a friend who was a great teacher that taught me a lot too he says, when you find the good, tell the kid what you found. And he would say sometimes to students, he would say, do you know what I like most about you? And it was something that he found good. And boy, that really perks up a student, but it does to a child at home also. I talk to parents a lot, and one of the things I tell them, the title of my talk is Talking to Your Kids, and then I give them 10 suggestions. And one of the suggestions is that you should compliment them more than you correct them, but that's not necessarily true. I fell into that trap myself. My dad never once told me anything I did good, but he always got me when I did something wrong. And a lot of teachers do the same thing. Like at schools, they have a referral. Every time a kid gets in trouble, you refer them to the office and then the thing goes home. But we don't have a good kid notice. Literally, I made one for our school. I put it in school colors. It's called Good Kid Notice. And I sent them home myself. And I could go on for hours about things that happen as a result of me sending home a good kid notice. This is why Jimmy is a good kid, and they did something particularly kind or helpful or whatever. And I've had mothers call me and cry. They said it's the first time we've ever got anything positive from the school. Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. And then Hal, can we have you back on our show to talk about your latest book, The Power of Good News?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. It's designed to lift spirits and get people to look for the good. That's the subtitle is Feeding Your Mind with What's Good for the Heart. And
I know, I love that. And how good news contributes to our well-being.
It does. There's a lot of research that proves that. Just like my mother taught me many, many years ago that the happiest people in the world were the people who were the most thankful. And she didn't have a college degree or do any research or anything. And now they're doing all kinds of research and saying thankfulness is one of the keys to happiness. And you won't meet a more thankful person than me, man. I wake up every morning. I've been in the same home for 48 years, but I still thank God that I have this home. I just think it was a stroke of luck that I ended up in it. And so thankfulness is a big deal.
Well, Hal, you just keep giving no matter what. You wake up every day and you keep giving. From the first call I had with you, you have inspired me, and you've offered to come talk to our Parent-Teacher Association and the teachers, and I'm just overwhelmed and excited. And so how can someone find and follow you and your work?
Yeah, well, there's one thing I remember registered in my mind many years ago. I read this thing that says life is in 3 phases. First phase is learn. Second phase is earn. That means a career. And third phase is return. Return what you've learned to others. If you did earn a lot of money, then return that to good causes. And I'm in the return phase. And it's been really nice, to tell you the truth. I've really enjoyed it, and partly, but you have to do the right things in the first 2 phases in order to make the return phase of your life a good one. And I had some good guidance and good help along the way. Yeah.
Well, I'll add the link to your website and the titles of your books in the description notes of this episode. And Hal, thank you so much. And until next time, I can't wait to see you again soon. Thanks again.
Okay, good. Yeah, always good to be with you, and be happy to do this again because you have so much energy. See, it comes to me just like my students used to energize me. So you have a way of energizing people too.
Well, that's all we've got for this episode of the Momnificent Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be honored if you would subscribe and rate if you really liked it. I know wherever you're listening right now, it might not be the best time to leave a comment, but feel free to leave a question, a review, or a comment at any time. And until next time, remember, don't worry, be happy.